Yeah. Great.
But another group, if you actually have a chance, you know, is that
Which surprised me. I thought librarians were safe when I went to school, but they were not mandated. Boy, they were a lot of librarians. I always slipped my friends who went into the library and said, oh, there's usually just one building. You'll be safe for your career. And then those big cuts came and yeah.
Church. That's going to change quickly.
Hello, everyone.
Oh, I don't think it's that.
Yes. Can you hear me now? I know it's a little quieter up front. Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Mackenzie Glenn-Tidrali, and I'm Program Director for Alumni Park and Place. On behalf of the Wisconsin Alumni Association, I want to welcome you all to One Alumni Place. If I may, can I ask, how many of you have been in this space before? Great, welcome back. And how many of you have come for a Badger Cafe program before? A number of you. Wonderful, thank you for coming back. And for those of you who haven't come for a Badger Cafe before, just want to let you know that the program brings UW-Madison faculty and alumni to communities around the world for timely topics in their area of expertise. And here in Madison, we offer about 2 to 3 of these per semester in One Alumni Place. And we have an exciting program coming up in March, so I'll tell you about at the end of the program. In addition to the Badger Cafes, we offer programs and events in this space for our alumni, members, and community to come and enjoy and hear stories from our alumni and about the great work that's happening here on campus. We have flyers for you if you'd like to learn more about our programs that you can pick up after the program. This evening, we are pleased to be partnering with our colleagues at the Wisconsin Foundation and Alumni Association, as well as University Communications, who bring us the wonderful publication, On Wisconsin. If you aren't familiar with On Wisconsin, it's published quarterly, and it tells the story of our alumni and campus community. And we have plenty of those throughout the center as well, so please feel free to pick one up if you don't have a copy. You might recognize the individual on the cover, who's our speaker, one of our speakers here this evening. And finally, I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsor for this special edition of Badger Cafe program. Tonight's program is made possible thanks to the generosity of the Sandra G. Sponham Alumni Park Signature Program Series Fund. And now I'd like to introduce my colleague, who will be introducing our speakers this evening. Please join me in welcoming Preston Schmidt, a writer from On Wisconsin.
Thanks, Mackenzie, and thank you everyone for being here tonight. I'm guessing Chris Borland needs little introduction. Many of you probably watched him at Camp Randall as he starred for the UW football team from 2009 to 2013. After his college days, he was drafted by the San Francisco 49ers, catching the attention of the entire NFL when he led the team's top 5 defense and tackles his rookie season. In an unprecedented move, he walked away from the game after his rookie season, citing concerns over the long-term risks of brain trauma. His announcement and subsequent work have helped to bring the realities of football to the mainstream consciousness. Chris consulted with many experts during his rookie season, including UW alumna Chad McGehee, a leading researcher on CTE, which is a degenerative brain disease that's linked to minor repetitive hits to the head. She has since released results from her analysis of 111 brains of former NFL players. 110 of them showed signs of CTE. When Chris retired, ESPN called him the most dangerous man in football for shining a bright light on this issue. But I think one of our readers, a 49ers fan who wrote to us, put it better. He called Chris the smartest and bravest man in football. Since leaving the game, Chris has pursued a new passion that aligns naturally with his thoughtful personality, meditation and mindfulness, which is the focus of our discussion tonight. As he said in the article, it's a pivot to positivity and to optimism, and it helped him as he transitioned from professional football to everyday life. He now lives in Los Angeles and teaches mindfulness at the Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute. As Chris's interest in mindfulness grew, he met Chad McGehee, who is also up here with us tonight. Chad is the Learning and Program Development Manager and a mindfulness teacher at the UW's world-renowned Center for Healthy Minds. He's developed and taught neuroscience-backed mindfulness programs for many groups of people, from kindergarten students to police officers. Chris and Chad share a mutual curiosity about whether mindfulness can uniquely benefit athletes, both active and retired. Their early results are promising. Last spring, they developed a first-of-its-kind mindfulness curriculum for 17 former NFL players, who met in Madison over the span of 2 months. Each week, McGehee taught them a new meditative practice and assigned a take-home training plan. After the program, many of the retired players reported that the meditative practices helped them to sleep better, to manage stress and physical pain, and to become more aware of the deep-rooted intensity they developed as players. Tonight, they'll share more about this experience and some of their other mindfulness work. Lastly, I'd like to introduce John Roach, who will serve as our moderator tonight. John was an Emmy Award-winning producer and writer for ABC and CBS in Chicago. He is now the founder of Roach Projects, a digital content company based here in Madison. John and Chris go a while back. John played football with Chris's father at Edgewood High School, where they were coached by George Chris, the father of current UW head coach Paul Chris. And most importantly, I'm happy to report that John, along with his wife and their 3 kids, are all UW alumni. So thank you again for being here, and please help me in welcoming Chris, Chad, and John.
Thanks all. As you can tell right away, I don't need a microphone. This will be thought-provoking, but we also want to have fun tonight. And what I'd like to do is start with Chad, who is an official academic. Okay? What is mindfulness?
Yeah, so mindfulness is really simple. Mindfulness is being aware of what's happening right now. Right? It's aware of our internal state. It's aware of the sensations, emotions, thoughts that are happening right now. And as we're aware of them right now, there's a little bit of space, there's a little bit of power that comes in there. And I think this is one of the things we've discovered in this work, especially with athletes. This taps us into what I like to think of as the eye of the hurricane, rather than being caught up in the storm. So mindfulness is that space. It's the eye of the hurricane, rather than getting pulled away in the storm. And the cool thing is that we can actually train to be there more often.
And Chris, how do you train for mindfulness?
With practices. That was one thing that I knew from football that I thought would work with athletes, was that these men, in this case, these former football players, were accustomed to doing the same thing every day without necessarily an ROI until game day. That's exactly what mindfulness is. I think there is some mystery around the practice sometimes. Some people think it's a religion or must be tied to Buddhism. They're just techniques, practices, the same as lifting weights or running sprints for your mind.
How do you practice it? Literally, what is your technique?
Personally?
Yeah, you personally, and now as Chad as well.
So there's many ways to practice mindfulness. I do breath awareness. Maybe I think we should start, who here has experience meditating? So there is an element of preaching to the choir.
Sure.
I can go deeper, Theravada and breath awareness. But just paying attention to the breath on purpose, and then when your mind inevitably wanders, return it to the focal point of where you feel the breath. For me, I focus on the difference in temperature between the inhale and exhale on my nostrils. And another important thing is the nature of continually returning your attention, that training, that kind of mental rep. Each time is an opportunity to practice some compassion. A really touchy-feely word that we didn't get into until like week 3 of the pilot. But each time I think we have this, and I know I, from sports and innately, have this propensity to be critical. If I sat down to meditate and 30 seconds in, I found myself thinking about what I had for lunch or that email I should have sent, to really beat myself up. So in a 10-minute sit, you might get 50 opportunities to be nice to yourself, which we really have an aversion to. And I know it helped the guys that went through our pilot.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things, like so many people think they're bad at mindfulness or bad at meditation, that they're doing it wrong. And typically what people mean is that their minds are wandering all of the time. But it's impossible to be bad at mindfulness. It's impossible to be bad at meditation, like Chris is pointing to. That moment when the mind wanders, a lot of times that's filled with recrimination or beating ourselves up. That's actually the opportunity. That's where there's that little bit of space. That's where we've tapped into that eye of the hurricane, and then we can choose what to do with our attention. And we can choose to bring it wherever we want. Like Chris is saying, we can choose to bring it back to the breath. And the breath is portable, right? It's always with us. It's a great tool. If you can feel the breath moving in and out of your body right now, you're in the present moment. The only time we can experience a sensation is in the present moment. And of course, we use the breath not to get really good at training attention to be with the breath, but to have, the skill of bringing our attention to be where we want it to be. Whether it's an opportunity to see a friend and really being there for it, or a task at hand, or whatever it is that we're doing, we're just training attention.
To be more specific, how often on a daily basis do you meditate, and for how long? And a real important point, where do you do it? And so I'm a writer, and I once heard a great writer say, it's the process that gets you into the chair and your hands on the typewriter or the keyboard that is almost as important as the actual writing, right? And he said, I picture myself as a dog circling itself in front of a fire, right? And then I sit down and that's when I write. So how often do you meditate, how long, and how do you get yourself into a place in a busy day in Los Angeles, a lot of stimulation there. How does that go about?
A dog circling a fire to find a place to lie down. You are a writer. That's a really important question. For me personally, I try to get to 40 minutes a day, however I get there. This with the caveat that don't compare, if you meditate or if you don't compare what other people are, their number or anything like that. 1 minute is great. 1 breath is great. I kind of have a hectic schedule. I travel quite a bit. And so I try to get to 40 minutes however I can. If it's 2 20-minute sits or some time in the morning, sprinkle in 5 minutes here or there. That's the aim. Also not trying to be too hard on myself when I inevitably fall short of those 40 minutes. It's for you, the practice. And again, that's some of that self-referential thinking coming in. I think that's common with meditators. And people that are just starting out is it's for you. And I think the most important thing is that it's daily.
Are you in a quiet place? Are you all alone? Are you in an airport terminal?
Sometimes I don't have the luxury making the connection last night from O'Hare to Madison to have a quiet, tranquil space. I do think setting is really important. So if you can find that fire, and whether it's a corner of the room or a quiet space in your home, something that's really intentional, where you go there to practice. That may be a luxury, and if you don't have that, the breath is eminently portable, and you can practice anywhere.
Chad, is meditation and the work that's being done at the Center for Healthy Minds, is it kind of like science's answer to the cultural traditions of prayer? Perhaps without all the trap. I mean, I had 12 years of Catholic education. So I grew up seeing people alone in church with rosary beads or just sitting there. And there's a meditative component to prayer. Although when I was meditating and praying in Catholic school as 10 years old, it was, "Dear God, please don't send me to hell for eternity," which is not necessarily a great vibe. But there is a longing for meditation in us, right? And that it's historically been manifested in religion and other practices.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say?
Yeah, so I think one of the things is, one of the definitions of meditation that I think speaks to this is to become familiar with. So we can become familiar with anything when we're meditating on it, right? So if we are wanting to become more familiar with the present moment, then we should use objects that are in the present moment, like the sensations of breathing or the sensations of the body. These bring us back to the present moment. But we can become familiar with anything. We can meditate on anything. So I think in spiritual traditions, people are meditating on their relationship to the divine or to God, which also speaks to, I think, the sort of mindfulness meditation that we're investigating at the Center for Healthy Minds and have done in this pilot, as to why people from various wisdom traditions have started to explore and benefit from these practices. Because a chaotic mind, if set down to prayer, is probably not going to maintain its object, that relationship with God. But if we can train the mind to kind of be where we want it to be and rest in an open, stable way, then it can support different wisdom traditions.
So a question I had for Chris when we were talking about this is, so, there are all sorts of fundamental human instincts, fight or flight, all sorts of things. And yet mindfulness can tamp down some of those things. But do not those emotions or instincts sometimes have a purpose? Are you just going to be blissed out 24 hours a day, which obviously would be great, but not sometimes practical? Do you know what I mean?
I totally do, and
like anger, for instance.
yeah, and I've wrestled with that. I think it's such an important distinction to make, and one of the things I do in my life is advocacy around brain injury, and there's plenty of reason to be livid for many reasons in that world, and I have all those feelings. They're useful. They have a place. They come from an organic circumstance. So I think it's a misconception to think that we're trying to quell those. There's people that are victims of oppression or in a difficult situation where anger or remorse or sadness are perfectly natural. I see mindfulness practice and know it in some of the research to be useful in just clarifying those emotions and where they come from. Really, I think it's a felt sensation in the body at first. And if someone cuts you off in traffic and you're still reeling from that when you go to walk in your door at home, to not act on what has transpired in the past or what you're thinking about in the future, but what you're feeling in the moment. So it's not suppressing or denying anything. I think it's incorporating and clarifying what's already there.
So, and we're going to get to the NFL program and also the paths that Chad and Chris took to get right here on the stage tonight. But before we go there, I'm just looking at meditation on an academic level. Marijuana is becoming legal all over the place, and they've done an incredible job of marketing all sorts of things that marijuana and CBD oil are supposed to be helpful for, and I cast a jaundiced eye at that stuff. So here's my question about meditation. What can it help you with, and what doesn't it do for you? So that, I'm leery of conventional wisdom or faddish wisdom. When your dad and I played football for George Christ, the conventional wisdom was to not give us water during practice, but give us a salt pill. It's like, okay, what research was that grounded in?
George changed that though, right? He started with...
Yeah, he gave us a garden hose at the end of the practice. No, right after I played, he changed that. But no, I was hallucinating at the end of every practice. But what, one of the key things to... a lot of things have come under wearing these kind of trappings. What is the realist about it? What is really beneficial about it? Especially what has been discovered at the Center for Healthy Minds, imaging, medical imaging, etc. And what is a little bit of puffery?
Yeah.
Is that a fair question to ask?
It's a great question to ask, because anybody can hang a shingle and say they're a mindfulness or a meditation teacher, and who knows what they're saying or what they're selling.
And they're going to read your palms and your hands as well, right?
There may be people, when I show up to speak places as a meditation teacher, they're like, all right, he's going to have a ponytail, tie-dye, right? Be like singing bell. And
those sandals that have individual toes.
So there's we're starting to learn scientifically kind of what are the impacts of these practices, but there's a whole heck of a lot that we don't know. And there's a lot that's kind of still to discover. But one of the things that we know for sure is that we are constantly training our minds. The brain is constantly changing. The fancy scientific word for this is neuroplasticity, and it's just that simple truth that our brains are constantly changing as a result of experience. So if our brains are constantly changing, we have the opportunity to harness that power to train for certain qualities, right? Are we interested in training for attention? Are we interested in training for kindness? Are we interested in training for balance and compassion? We have the ability to do that, kind of harnessing this neuroplasticity, which actually kind of makes me think a little bit about the Center for Healthy Minds and kind of how we do what we do. Our founder, Dr. Richard Davidson, in 1994 was asked by His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, why do we have all these tools of modern neuroscience where we're using them to study things like depression, anxiety, and fear? Why aren't we using these same tools in modern neuroscience to study things like concentration, happiness, and connection? And his answer at the time was, I don't know, I don't have a good answer, it's hard to do. And that kind of started his trajectory that ultimately resulted in the creation of the Center for Healthy Minds to, kind of give a neuroscientific basis for what can be seen as kind of the non-technical term is like woo-woo, right? Stuff that's out there. When Richie started his career, his colleagues said, you cannot study meditation, that is going to sink your academic career. And he's kind of single-handedly responsible for creating this, whole field that we might think of as kind of like contemplative neuroscience or the science of training the mind.
Chris, first of all, we'd like all of you, if we accomplish nothing else, we all want you to be able to leave here today and throw around the term neuroplasticity at cocktail parties, when you're playing bridge with people, or at a bus stop. What's your take on the neuroplasticity thing? Are you there yet?
Well,
Personally?
I think it's proven. I don't have a take on it. Neuroplasticity is real. Certainly there's plenty of unknowns. The brain is the most complicated thing in the universe, but it's been shown that through these practices and through other methods you can change your brain physiologically, which to me was a revelation in meeting Richie 4 years ago. I was under the impression that once you were an adult, your brain was fixed. And personally, it's very promising. I did play 10 years of football and played through a lot of concussions. This isn't something we explored in the pilot program, but I'm very personally interested in neuroplasticity. It may be of the most dire consequence for me over the next few decades. But for others, and I always try to discern between my opinion and experience and why the practice might be helpful to other athletes and people, is to live in that more positive world. Richie has done it with contemplative neuroscience. A lot of psychologists were doing it in the mid-90s with positive psychology. And here we now have tools for schools, for police officers, for others, to approach a situation with more clarity, maybe with a little more theory of mind, understanding others' perspectives, and an ability to take a pause. I think it's, particularly in this climate in 2019, understanding other perspectives, taking a pause, responding rather than reacting. If we had a tool to cultivate that in more people, it'd be wonderful, and we have it.
So we, at this time, I'd like to turn things over to Chad, because we thought we'd do a little exercise so that this discussion is not just, that it's based on something real that you've actually done. So swing away.
Yeah, so we're going to do a practice. So this may be old hat for some of you, it may be new. For those of you that are new, I want to frame it this way. It's a little ridiculous, so we can have a little fun. Imagine an alien showed up, right? And this alien asked you to describe what fun is. And you started talking, and it would make like a little bit of sense. It'd be way better to go do something fun and say that what we just did, that was fun. Or better yet, that like felt sense experience of it, that's fun. So mindfulness is like that. It's the experience that leads the way. We kind of use the mind to frame things in a way that are supportive of that, but it's the experience that we're interested in. So if you'll indulge me, let's practice for a bit. So you don't have to do anything different. All you have to do to begin is feel your feet on the floor. The sensations that are happening right now in your feet. The weight, the pressure, contact with your shoes, Just bringing attention to the sensations in your feet. There's a football coach, Tom Coughlin, who has a line, "Be where your feet are." Just bringing attention to be right here. And shifting attention now to where your body's making contact with the chair. And the weight, pressure, and clothes against your body. For this practice and any practice, eyes can be closed or open, whatever is comfortable for you. And bringing attention to your shoulders, jaw, forehead. Not trying to make anything different. Allowing things to be however they are and allowing them to change. Now bringing your attention to the sensation of breathing. You don't have to go get the breath is already here. You just rest attention back onto the sensation of breathing. Maybe in and out of the nose, maybe rise and fall of the chest, rise and fall of the stomach, wherever you most notice the sensations of breathing. Giving yourself permission that all you have to do for the next few moments is sit here and feel your body breathing. And of course, the mind is going to wander. It's going to go to the future, it's going to go to the past. It's not a problem. The moment we notice the mind has wandered, that is a moment of mindfulness. That is the moment there's the space, we're in the eye of the hurricane, and we can choose to bring our attention back to this breath as it's moving in and out of the body. As we come to the close of this practice, just taking a moment to check in, kind of take stock of how things are, the sensations in your body, emotion or mood that's here right now, your mind, thoughts, busy, not so busy, focused, not focused, and however it is fine. Just meeting our experience with a sense of openness, kindness, curiosity. And if eyes have closed, you can open them. So the room even feels a little bit different. So how many people noticed that your shoulders had turned into earrings? And they just kind of came down. Or how about jaw? Anyone notice any tension in your jaw? Yeah, we carry around so much tension that we're unaware of. And you'll notice in the instruction, it never said kind of relax anything. It was just kind of bring awareness, bring attention to this area. And when we do that, it's kind of like this natural uncoiling that happens. How about anyone's mind wander? Right, all of us, right? And it's not a problem. Every time the mind wanders and we bring it back, that's the rep, right? That's getting stronger. It's actually doing ourselves a service, kind of bringing it back. So if your mind wandered 40 times in the 3-ish minutes that we did that, you got a lot stronger. So congratulate yourself, right? Don't beat yourself up for doing that.
Thanks, Chad. That was great. So let's pivot a little bit. In my notes, I have it as at 2. Rather than speaking about mindfulness and the kind of objective academic examination of the effects of meditation, I'd like to talk about the personal path that both of you took to get here. And I'm going to start with Chad, because your intro is shorter. And you had a really powerful answer when I asked you, what brought you to meditation and the study of it?
Yeah. So now there's a setup. Hopefully this has some power to it as well. So I came to meditation out of suffering in my own life. And I wanted a way to meet my life directly. I didn't want to hide from it. I didn't want to run from it. I wanted to meet the life that I was living. And it was mindfulness and meditation that gave me not only kind of like a construct and a way of kind of thinking about it, but also a moment-to-moment skills to actually be able to do that. And has since become a huge support for everything that I do. I've got a 3-year-old at home, in the middle of, having a career. My wife is here, so in a marriage, there's a lot going on in my life and there's a lot going on in the world. So it's since become a support for everything that I do. Even thinking like right now, I'm aware of the sensations that are happening in my feet. I'm aware of my body sitting here because this is a precious opportunity. I want to be here for it. I don't want to miss this. So it's since become a huge support for kind of everything that I do in my life.
And Chris, how did you make your way to mindfulness and meditation?
I could share the bullet points. Played football, quit, got involved in that research world, and pivoted to effective neuroscience. But I was thinking, as you were asking the question, how did I really wind up connecting with Richie? And I think it's a uniquely Madison story. Nancy Francisco Welke, who works at UW Children's
Great woman.
Hospital, they do wonderful work. The athletic department, each Friday before home games, football players visit the Children's Hospital. The athletic department has done a wonderful job of making that a consistent outreach. That's how I came to know Nancy, and so I knew her from 09 through 13 when I was here. And we kept in touch and developed somewhat of a friendship. And when I was going through the transition, she shared with me, have you met Richie? And I didn't know who he was. Embarrassingly, we practiced next to the Weissman Center where the lab used to be, and I had no idea. She facilitated that introduction. And coincidentally, I'd been practicing kind of clumsily on my own. When she mentioned his name, began to look into his research and was floored, was really in awe of what he's done. And so it's not really my interest or path. I think about the athletic department and how active they are in the community and how that brought me to Nancy and how Nancy brought me to Richie, and sitting next to basically Uncle John, sitting in front of friends and people I've come to know in Madison. It always feels like a smaller town than 250,000.
It is a small town. 2 degrees of separation.
And then for it to culminate being here at the Alumni Association. I came to it because of passion, interest, my path, but because I was part of a really special place.
So now we want to move on to the project that Chris and what you guys are working on, okay? And I just want to set it up by saying, I saw Chris when he first practiced here or came to camp when you were still in high school. Your dad gave me a heads up you're coming to town. Watched you, met you freshman year, watched you throughout your career. And then went out to dinner right before the draft, and then the news that you quit. And I sent you a text, said, Chris, courageous. And you said, easy decision, Mr. Roach, which I thought was great. But now you two are working together, frankly, on a project with some of your brothers, your football brothers. Talk to me about how that came to be and what is happening.
Well, the aim with the pilot program that we ran in 2017 was really modest, to see if this would work with former athletes. I knew it to be true in my experience. We didn't know where particularly the age range of 40 to 60. It was a different era, and we didn't know if players would be receptive to these practices. They were, and fairly quickly. I think halfway through the first session, we got to stop prefacing things with, hey, this may feel strange, or this may sound funny. Players would say, let's just do it, all right? You don't have to.
No apologies.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So in the same way, we carried over that study, or that pilot program, to work with active athletes. And so almost instantly, we're into the UW, and Chad has spearheaded that work. It's something that in such a short period of time, we didn't have this when I was playing, and I'm still friends with kids that are active athletes here, and it's one of the most precious things that they enjoy with their sport experience, and Chad's the reason why.
Thanks, Chris. I mean, I think one of the things, as we got this, Chris and I, met, and we're like, let's kind of do this, this makes a lot of sense to try to, kind of a pilot training. And one of the things we encountered right away was this is a population that is really good at training. Like the best in the world at training, right? So once there was kind of a sense of, what we're doing here is training the mind, and this is rigorous, this is systematic, this is scientifically based, they were all in, right? Let's do this. And as you were pointing to earlier, kind of used to the grind, right? For those that have, some experience with practice, it can turn into a grind. Right? There's some days where it's just kind of, we don't want to do it. Or it's maybe not the most pleasant experience. Well, this is a group of people that are used to kind of keeping at it and also supporting each other in the practice. Like the locker room is something that they know. Training together is something that they know. And in, kind of mindfulness and meditation, the support of our peers can be extremely helpful. So while at the front end, it may seem, if we had 100 NFL guys in the room and said, who wants to learn how to meditate? They may scoff at us, because it comes with a lot of baggage, right? People have all the cultural trappings of what it means to meditate. But once we kind of got past that to, this is training the mind, then it's, sign me up, let's do this.
And Chris, I've had the chance to work with elite athletes and artists in my career, and one of the first things I thought was people are wowed by speed and power and strength and grace. But what is undervalued or misunderstood is how smart a lot of elite athletes are. How much the ritual they go to get ready mentally to play a game in front of an audience of 200 million people on Super Bowl Sunday, or how they visualize their performance. And you just don't get to play at the level that you played at by being strong and fast. There's also a huge mental component to it. Have you found that that's actually a door that's already kind of open with working with these guys?
Oh, I think certainly. Particularly with football, which is, at positions like middle linebacker, safety, certainly quarterback is a highly intellectual sport. You study film for 20 hours a week, memorize a game plan, and it changes in flux over those 3 hours of the game. So you're doing mental gymnastics constantly, and have had enough background practice and film study to navigate that fluidly. And so I think, thank you for that, if that was a...
Yeah, no, I'm serious. And also just how they get into the zone, right? It's not just a physical thing.
Yes, and athletes understand that. We joke that a surefire way not to get into the zone is to grit your teeth and like, I'm going to be in the zone now because the game started. All we can really control are the causes and conditions. Have done the background work, have studied the film, understand what to expect, but you can't force it.
Right.
And the same is true with meditation. You have to let it happen.
So there's another, Chad mentioned suffering. You have former players. First of all, when I saw League of Denial, which is a two-part series on Frontline about 5 years ago, and I actually know the writers from San Francisco who worked on it, that story was bubbling up. But as someone who played football, someone who likes football, honestly, it was just a jaw dropper. And my first reaction, well, this is a brand killer. But after you got past the business or entertainment part of it, you move to the compassion thing. Now there's real data on what this game, if played incorrectly or played at all even, can do to the men who play it, and then also people who play hockey and soccer. We've just learned more about how vulnerable the brain is. So there are athletes who are damaged or may be damaged from the sport they played. And you work with some of those athletes, right? What is that like, and what is their reaction, and what benefits, if any, have you seen? And this falls under compassion. This doesn't fall under sports, I would argue.
Yeah, there's so much there. The spectrum ranges. I think League of Denial was really well written and then well done. Certainly there's highly publicized stories of Junior Seau and others. There are players that played in the NFL that are totally fine. And so it's a difficult thing to navigate. One of the challenges is the unknown. And so if you've got a guy at 40 that's experiencing some memory loss, some hyperbolic coverage could persuade him into thinking he has a death sentence. Conversely, some narratives that this is overblown or that Dr. McGehee, her research is exaggerated, has a gaslighting effect. There's few things in the way of efficacious therapies for players that have brain injury. One thing I love and appreciate about mindfulness is that it's helped decipher the signal from the noise. It's a tremendous challenge to navigate post-career life for many players. They have that added psychological weight of sometimes outlets spinning narratives, sometimes industry funding science, and they don't know what the truth is. And so there's talk about, that's a difficult thing to navigate with a healthy brain. Mindfulness, I think, in my experience a little bit, and certainly with some older players that I've worked with, has helped let some of that noise settle and depict a clearer picture of the challenges that lie before an athlete who's had brain injury.
The peer-to-peer nature of it has to give it cred too, right?
100%. I was an advocate for this, and when I came short of being able to represent the science, or if players were especially skeptical, I'd rely on that brotherhood or teammate aspect of saying, just trust me on this one.
Yeah. You were a captain.
And I think too, something we did that I'm really glad we did was have a dinner after each session. So much came out during that. So we would meet for an hour and a half and go through practices and talk about the cycle of meditation and what it is. But I think equally as therapeutic for the players was to be on that team again. There's only around 20,000 living NFL alums. You don't bump into one another on the street.
Right.
And even if people do empathize, they don't understand the specific challenges sometimes.
And Chad, the thing that is intriguing to me, and again, don't want to stray from the science of it, right? Tell me if I'm extending this too far, but we have a whole generation of American service veterans who have brain trauma from IED, or have PTSD, or people who've been in car accidents, or people who have had first responders who've had issues that aren't physical, but trauma nonetheless, right? Do you think that this exercise or study you're doing, can it extend to other populations readily?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and in short, yes. I think it can, and there's been some research that's happened with some of those populations and the effects of these practices. I mean, I think as you're describing it, those are people who have maybe experienced trauma like at, a couple, standard deviations away more significantly, but I think about, what's true about all of us, including people who've experienced more intense trauma, and like the effects of these sorts of practices on simple things like sleep. How many of us have been awake at 1:30 in the morning with our minds just spinning completely, right? And it's not like we said, you know what, this is the time that I should relive that conversation I had with my supervisor for the fourth time, right? It just happens, right? What if we had a tool that could allow us to say, oh, this is a thought that's coming up. I'm just going to let that thought go by. I'm going to bring my attention back to the sensations that are happening in my body. My body's tired, and then naturally fall asleep.
And there are some hard facts about it. I mean, doesn't meditation affect pulse rate and respiration rate and all? I mean, when you get nervous and anxious, you breathe faster and more shallowly, but there's like real simple medical data about it.
There's a lot of like really interesting data. One that I think is like really compelling has to do, surprisingly enough, with text messages. And so there was a really cool study that was done where they sent people text messages. And in the first question of the text message, they said, "What are you doing?" And the second was, "What are you paying attention to?" So what percentage of time do you think people are paying attention? What percentage of time do you think you're paying attention to what you're doing? Right? What they found was 47% of the time people are paying attention to what they're doing. Which means half of you just missed that stat. That joke was more for me. But think about the implications of that. Half of the time, our attention isn't where we want it to be. The implications that has on the ability to complete a task at work. We know what that feels like when we're with a loved one or with a friend, and we know when we're really with that person, when that person is really with us. And the cool thing is we can train, and there's evidence to support that we can train attention to be where we want it to be more often. And of course, that's fundamental to doing all sorts of things well, whether it's more kind of on like the well-being, living a life of meaning, and on the performance side. If I'm a middle linebacker and I like see that man in motion go, I don't know anything about being a middle linebacker. So as you can see, our frames are slightly different.
So, go ahead. I'm sorry, Chad. Go ahead.
But just kind of like there's so many things that draw our attention away from what actually matters. And do we have the skills to bring our attention to the things that matter most to us?
When we were preparing for this, I said to Chris, I said, this stuff sounds serious and it's kind of reverential and, wow, this is heavy stuff. And I said, is there any room for fun in meditation? Okay? And you had some good responses.
Yeah, well, yeah, it does sometimes seem to get a little dry. And I can remember we first started talking in 2015 to get this thing going, and the Dalai Lama was speaking in Madison in February of 2016, and was fortunate enough to attend. And I was in this really strange place where I just started practicing, and so I was going out to the bars after the Dalai Lama event.
and ran into him?
Yeah. I'm screwed, I'm going to be totally found out. But I remember talking to you shortly afterwards, and you asked what I thought, what was my takeaway. And I just let it out. I said, he's funny as shit. he's hilarious.
Yeah.
And just, I think that comes from being present, from being in tune with your thing. And just, if you've ever had the chance, you can watch videos, eminently joyful and lighthearted, and it's inspiring. And ultimately, it's what the practice is all about, taking it out into the world. It's great if we can develop these benefits internally, but how we interact with others, and enjoying life.
2 more questions, and then we're going to open up for questions from the audience. Chad, what's next? Okay, UW and the Center for Healthy Minds has led the way in a lot of this stuff. Richie really did some groundbreaking stuff. He's like deified in his own right. I saw a thing where he did at Google, and the guy wanted him, he said, I think he's going to win 2 Nobel Prizes, and the applications will be legitimate. Sorry, anyone get that? So, what's next? What are you guys looking at downstream? And feel free, it's not on the record. We don't expect footnotes. But, what could happen?
Yeah, I think we're at this point in the trajectory where we have some evidence, to say like these practices can be really beneficial. So I think moving forward, if we can start to kind of figure out what practices are beneficial for who and when, if we have kind of like personalized medicine, could we have a personalized meditation so that we know kind of what's going to work for people and when? But of course we need a lot of research to investigate that because people are complicated, they have lots of life experiences. So I think bringing this work out into a wide range of populations, and to steal your metaphor that I learned from you, 50 or 60 years ago, guys weren't lifting weights who are professional athletes, men and women. And then a few started to lift weights. A little bit of science started to point to the benefits of that practice. And now you can't imagine, a weight room in anywhere USA, or a high school in anywhere USA that doesn't have a weight room, right? Even calling it weight training is antiquated. So might the sort of practices that we're discussing tonight be on a similar trajectory? That in another 10, 15, 20 years, training our minds, taking care of our minds in this way will be just as common it is for us to know how we kind of take care of our bodies today.
Any thoughts, Chris?
I would echo all of that, in part because that's my line.
You guys are going to have royalties in there.
But I would add minimum effective dose. And so as someone that meditates 40 minutes a day, I can get the same benefits from 20. That would be nice to know.
Yeah.
Or the correlation between time meditated and the benefits. For people that aren't monks, a lot of this research has been done with those that have meditated for tens of thousands of hours. And there's more coming out about those that have meditated less, but that's something I'm really fascinated by.
So we're going to go to questions, but under the headline compassion, I want to ask you what I asked you in the green room, and that is, because I know you, care about you, love your family, love your pops, but also a fan, watched you play and all. How you doing? How's your body? How's your head? And just so you know you don't feel special, I ask it to everyone who plays. Okay? How you doing?
I'm good. A little bit of a shoulder thing, but most people that played linebacker at a high level for 6 years have a little bit of a shoulder thing.
I actually heard your dad complain that you did too much reaching on your tackling, so
Yeah.
I'm familiar with that.
He's of the mind that it was my fault there. But I'm great. Happy, healthy, doing well.
Good. So here we are. Hi, Mackenzie. So, folks, do you have any questions? Raise your hand. Mackenzie will get a mic to you. Here we go. Couple over there.
A note to talk right into the mic.
So Chris, you didn't say this specifically, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are. So you said your career, you ended up with a number of concussions. There's the threat of CTE. Is there, in your mind, hope that meditation actually will cure the brain, will head off the CTE, will work with this neuroplasticity to rewire so that you minimize the chance of CTE in the future?
In short, I would say no. One of the first things that I spoke about with Richie was just that question. And he told me, if you have a pathology, if you have damage, you'll have that pathology. A protein is laid down in your brain, the caveat that I'm not a neuroscientist, and it's a unique pathology. What meditation may provide is something I've expressed a little bit tonight, some space between that. So an acknowledgement of, let's say I'm trying to recall a name and I can't think of it. Without that space, you may run down this train of self-hatred and frustration and embarrassment and shame. And I know plenty of players that go through that cycle. I think meditation may be a tool where if that happens, a player could say, I can't remember. And leave it at that. But no, I don't think it will reverse the damage.
There's another couple hands over here.
Back to your the statistic about 47%, which was kind of fascinating. What have university or corporations or educational institutions been trying to do to take mindfulness and kind of monetize it, to take the 47 to 75?
Yeah.
Are there examples of that or best practices around where that's happening?
That's a great question. Yes, there are people that are trying to monetize that, right? So I think it's really important to be very clear on what our intention is. And is our intention, if we were to bring this into, a workplace, for example, to have the employees grind even more so we can just kind of squeeze every last penny out of them? Sure, that could be done, right? Or is our intention that if we support the well-being of our employees, that they will actually be able to be more robust in their capacities? And so we need to be able to discern those two things. But it's very possible to kind of take the shallow approach and say, I'm just going to teach this skill and kind of tear it away from any kind of like ethical construct around actually caring about the people that we're teaching this skill to.
So just to follow up on that, maybe for Chris, is there any sports teams that you're aware of that are really more onto the monetization side of performance and doing some of that?
Yeah, the Chicago Cubs have a meditation coach or teacher. The Washington Nationals do as well. I've been involved in introducing it to a couple different clubs. It is a precarious endeavor because in some ways, purists would say that monetizing the practice bastardizes the practice. And so intention is really important. There are those that I think that are navigating that skillfully. I teach with Search Inside Yourself. It was a program founded at Google They're very upfront about the nature of navigating, monetizing these practices. Ultimately, though, I think the broad path isn't at odds with the deep path. And so if you can go into corporate settings and teach basics of mindfulness, or do it in an athletic department, and if all anybody picks up is the 3 minutes we shared today, to me that's a huge win. And it isn't at odds with the monk or the person that goes on retreats all the time. I think it's a beautiful, wonderful thing that we should encourage more and more.
Can I just speak to that too? Because I own my own business, had for 35 years. Our staff, goes from 10 to 15 people depending on how busy it is. And during real stressful times, I bring in a masseuse, I bring in lunches, and I wouldn't view bringing in someone to help with meditation to handle the stress, because we're in a deadline business, right? I would view it as just making it a healthier workplace, and so your heart is pure, but the casual result is you have happier employees who are more productive, don't crash and burn, don't have stressors at home, all of which is good for your business, but if your heart's in the right place, you just care about them first. Fortunately, I have a small business, so there's a familial component to it, right? But as someone who owns a business, I wouldn't view it as monetization. I would view it as caring about your folks, for what it's worth.
Are you hiring?
If I land another big client, yes.
Hi, thank you for coming tonight. My name is Patty Shinners. I'm a family nurse practitioner, and I know that mindfulness is getting away from technology, but a question I get frequently is, and I'm thinking of the app Calm, are there apps out there that you would recommend or not recommend for people who want to get into meditation that just don't know where to begin?
Yeah. So a couple things. As somebody who works at the Center for Healthy Minds, we're working on an app, so I'm contractually obligated to talk about it. And it's kind of early stages now, Healthy Minds.
I can hear them clapping at work.
And our intention is to bring kind of like what's the best neuroscientific knowledge we have about training the mind kind of out into the world. Because there are lots of apps, and how efficacious they are or not, is up to question. So that's one. I think, and this is something that Richie said, the best meditation we can do is the one that we'll actually do. Right? So if Calm works for you, great. Right? If Headspace works, great. If sitting by ourselves quietly and drinking a cup of coffee works, great. Like whatever we can do to give ourselves those moments to kind of be with our own experience, that's the one we should do.
Great, thank you.
By the way, I bought an Apple Watch 3, and there's an app called Breathe that is a native app to the Apple Watch. And 4 times a day it taps you on the wrist and says, you should breathe for a minute, and you can set it for 2, 3, 4, 5. And then it taps you on the wrist to slow your breathing down, and then you exhale. And it's like accidental meditation. It's amazing. So for what it's worth.
Hi, thank you for speaking. It was really great. I'm curious if, I know you had said that you're implementing meditation and mindfulness in the athletic department. I'm curious if that's just with the football team or if it's with all athletics or kind of where that's at.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So we're similar to the pilot that we talked about with the retired NFL players. This is very early and exploratory, and kind of starting to kind of figure out what is the right way to do this work. What's possible in this work. So starting with a few teams and kind of finding our way through to hopefully bring this to all student athletes and all staff. So that not only, and this is one of the things I get excited about when it comes to training in athletic context, is there's short-term gains, like I want to be better at whatever my athletic discipline is, and part of that is training the mind, spending time in the eye of the hurricane, being a better teammate, but those of course are transferable skills long after an athletic career is over, when we're in a workplace, in a relationship, in a complicated world. So how do we harness kind of those skills for a short-term gain, that can be beneficial, but also, in the long term.
Quick question, how did you select the players to be in your pilot group? Were they people that you knew, that you felt comfortable with? Was it an open forum, First 29 people get pizza and
We originally wanted to do a destination pilot, an intensive, I'm not kidding, an intensive at a beautiful location to recruit players. We couldn't do that.
Vegas.
So
pizza for me.
mostly people that I'd known or encountered doing advocacy work. I'd worked with a couple nonprofits that unfortunately have a kind of Rolodex of players that could use something like the pilot, and so pre-existing relationships.
We have a question from Facebook. All right, I have heard that when meditation is the hardest to do, in those moments when you do it, you're actually gaining more significant benefits, just like lifting heavier weights. What do you think? Chad, Chris?
Thanks, Mom, for commenting.
That was just a do it.
I'm very interested in this question, and I do want to defer to Chad. Do you have initial thoughts on?
I mean, scientifically, we don't know, you know. So I would say, in my own experience, I've experienced benefits from doing it when it's pretty pleasant. You know, my mind is pretty stable. I had an experience recently where I was sitting at my desk and I was completely overwhelmed. Even a meditation teacher, completely overwhelmed, right? And my mind was just spinning, right? You know, like anxiety was coming up. You know, I'm not going to get this done. Quality isn't going to be what I need it to be. So I said, all right, I need to not do this. So I went to the back of our office, laid down on the ground, did a 20-minute practice, and the entire time it was deeply unpleasant. It was just, my mind was just a zoo, my body kind of got tight, stayed pretty tight. Finished the 20 minutes, went back to my desk, sat there, and there was a sense of, oh, there's really just like these 3 things that I need to get done today. Yeah, I can probably get those done. Those other things will be there. All right, I'll get it done. So, some personal experience with it.
Yeah, I think I share that experience. I'd hate for folks to think that it needs to be tough for big gains to be made, or to get wrapped up in the fight when it's more of an awareness.
By the way, since you're promoting your app, my son is here from Los Angeles. He's a singer-songwriter and a Badger grad, and he's done a meditation soundtrack, right, JT?
Yep.
What's it called? What's it called?
Thank you for the promo.
That's right. Spotify, iTunes, Walmart. No, what's it called?
It's called Ripples, a meditation experience.
Great. Thanks, dude.
Chris, I was very intrigued by your comment about a minimum effective dose with regard to time, I guess, or quality of meditation. For myself, I've been a neuroscientist my entire life. I'm wondering how you quantitate that extent of fulfillment, or is it a qualitative assessment?
Again, with the caveat of just being a broken down football player, I think that's a really fascinating question in terms of subjectivity. So much about meditation is just really your state of consciousness. It's very similar to brain injury in football, and part of the challenges of quantifying what athletes are experiencing is you're relying on testimony from someone who has a compromised perspective. And so I don't know how you quantify it. We do have some neuroscientists in the room, but that's a great question, and frankly I won't pretend to have the answer.
And I think part of it is like that, to the question of what are we looking to do. A lot of the work at the Center for Healthy Minds moving forward is to create measures to start to pick up on the changes that are happening. We just don't have very good measures to pick up on these changes right now.
Go ahead, time for one more, right, Mackenzie?
First of all, thank you all for coming. It's been awesome. I just had a quick question for Chad. What specifically are you seeing in terms of like the anatomical changes in the brain? Like what studies have you championed, or what specific studies do you see?
So I'm not a scientist. Rough question to go out on. But there's actually one study that I find really illuminating. And in this study, what we did at the center is we had 2 groups of people. Long-term meditators, people with lots of practice experience, and group with no practice experience. And had them in the fMRI brain scan, and we're monitoring the parts of their brain that are responsible for the perception of pain. And the experimental design was these people are kind of in the brain scan, they would hear a sound, and then a few moments later, like they had a kind of band on their wrist, a strong heat shock would come through, so they started to learn sound, negative stimulus is coming. So for the folks with a lot of practice experience, they're in fMRI, that part of their brain that's responsible for perception of pain is pretty stable, sound comes, stays pretty low, then the actual heat shock comes, shoots way up, it's there for a moment or two, it's gone, then it comes back down to baseline. For the folks with no practice experience, they're in the fMRI, this part of their brain responsible for perception of pain is pretty stable, the sound comes, and you can imagine what happens, that part of the brain that's responsible for perception of pain shoots way up before the stimulus is there, just hearing the sound. So it's really activated, and then the stimulus comes, it stays really elevated for a little bit, then it's gone, and that part of their brain stays elevated for a long time. So this I find really compelling because it speaks to the benefits of training the mind. Because there's all the add-ons to the experience, and then there's the experience itself. The brain doesn't know the difference. So if this can happen to people with thousands of hours of practice experience, at least it gives hope to us mere mortals that we can start to experience some of those benefits.
Any final thoughts, Chris?
That's a hard one to follow. I just want to express my gratitude. This has been wonderful. Thank you all for coming out. And John, it's been great to reconnect.
Yep.
Chad, thank you.
Chad and Chris, everybody. How about this facility? Unbelievable.
Yes.
Thank you. Please join me once again in thanking both Chad, Chris, and John for a wonderful program. Thank you to all of our Facebook viewers this evening, and thank you to all of you for coming out on a sunny February day and joining us here. As I mentioned, we offer programs in this space into the spring and summer, so please, we have flyers if you'd like to pick one up. We have another Badger Cafe happening on March 26th coming up with some new faculty members from the English department. We'd love to see you all there. And really quickly, I just want to thank all of the staff who helped make all of these programs possible, specifically Jordan Langer, who puts on all of our Badger Cafe programs. And all of the staff who helped make it possible today. So if you're a staff member, do you mind just raising your hand? I'm not going to say everybody's name. Great. Thank you so much. Please enjoy some more refreshments. We're here until 8. Thanks so much.